This is Inspiring Design, where unique innovators come together to share their knowledge, share their insight, and keep us up to date with the latest industry trends. And here's your host, Roshan Senanayake.
What's up, listeners? It's Roshan here. Welcome to a brand new episode of Inspiring Design. Today is episode 24, and we're here to talk about one of my favorite topics, design thinking, entrepreneurship, and innovation. It's one of the most hottest topics right now and influential in almost every single sector. The education sector is aligning with the 21st century skill sets, and design thinking is right alongside of this every step of the way. I'm personally a huge advocate of it, aligning my own approach across multiple facets like teaching in business and facilitation. So I want to hear from one of the experts. Let me introduce you to the guest for today. I have here with me Selena Griffith. Selena is one of the senior lecturers here at the University of New South Wales in design thinking, entrepreneurship and innovation. She's been here at UNSW for over 20 years, and her specialization is in the social impact of design thinking and its systems change. She's the lady to learn from. Selena, welcome to Inspiring Design.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Can we start off with a little bit of background and a little bit of your story?
Yes, I studied industrial design here at UNSW in its first iteration, and took that as a graduate on to work in design management roles in large corporates and also big international product companies. So
awesome.
Mostly using it in product development and developing ways to gain user insight to have better market penetration across multiple markets, not just in Australia but globally.
Yeah. And have you found that it's actually got different labels, design thinking in itself?
Well, back when I was using it, design thinking term was a really new kind of academic construct. And so what was really happening is that there was this fluidity between marketing, which was very much focused on the now, and design, which was focusing on the future, and psychology, which was about understanding how people may behave and how we can manipulate their behaviours, and ergonomics, a whole lot of different disciplinary practices that made sense to be married together. And that's sort of, they've all evolved into this thing that we now call design thinking. So it's been around since about, if you look back at the history of design thinking, it really started at the early sort of 1900s.
Exactly, yeah.
And it came from three different backgrounds. It came from engineering, it came from production, and it came from the need to look at how humans interacted with machines when they were making things to lessen injuries and improve productivity.
There you go. I actually have studied the history of it, and I just find that that's why I asked a label question right up the start. And I think Tim Brown, he's the one who coined, the design thinking as that label that's gone more popular now. But in your expertise, if you had to define what design thinking is, what would that be?
It's a systems approach to problem solving for me in the social sector. So it's how do we approach our understanding of how humans behave within systems, and how we can understand how those systems work in order to make effective changes to either human behaviour or the system to get a better outcome for the greater good.
Yeah. See, that's actually very interesting because it's a little bit different to my understanding of it, because you've got that, I think, interest in the social element. How does that actually impact the industry from your point of view?
Which industry?
So any
industry. Well, look, if I look at the design that if I'm working on a consulting gig, producing some design. So for example, I did a big design work for Vivid this year, and I had to think about, we've got a couple of million people coming to look at it.
Wow.
It's got to look good in the day as well as the night, because half the visitors will come during the day.
Yeah.
And most of the works, no one thinks about how they're going to look during the day. They only think how they'll look at night.
Yeah.
What technologies am I using? How am I going to make this? What time frame have I got? What budget have I got? So you're balancing all these different competing needs in a design thinking context. You're balancing internally all the needs for the organisation and the client, and you're balancing externally all the needs of the end user. And if you're a good designer, you should also be balancing in the needs of the environment, because we can't live on this planet with a bad environment.
Yeah.
And you should also be balancing in the needs of the general public that are affected by whatever technology, design, intervention that you're making. And so for me, then I've created a system which I have to consider. So design is about nutting out how all those moving pieces need to come together to create the perfect recipes. It's like cooking, you put all your ingredients together and you can cook, or you can put all the ingredients together, understanding deeply what the people at the table like and respond to, and you'll create a magic experience rather than a I've seen that kind of experience.
No, I actually like the way you describe that, because it goes into it is that detail, isn't it, that makes the big difference. Now, if you had to outline a model, do you consider it a linear approach?
No, I've always practiced design in a cyclical approach, because if you are a good designer, you're not ever really designing for yourself, you're designing for everyone, and everything is always changing in relation to everyone. And it sounds very obtuse, but if you think about it, the economy is always changing, fashion is always changing, technology
change is the only permanent thing.
Change, and so a lot of people hate change, but it's designer's best friend. We love change. So you need to anticipate that change, and then you need to bring that change as a desirable thing to your people that you're working with. And often when you're working in a social impact context like I am, change could be something that actually can, if you're changing like the colour of your iPhone because everyone likes green this week, it doesn't really impact heavily on a lot of people, unless green's a really toxic colour to make. But if you're changing the way you're providing a social service to a disadvantaged group of people, you can't just change it. You really have to be considered. So this is where human-centred design is really important, and you will continually iterate your offering to make sure that it meets the needs of the group that you're working with. Yeah.
No, I'm actually very happy to hear that, because in that definition now it more aligns with how we've been approaching the practice, because when we train teachers, we're in there understanding the requirements, putting ourselves in the shoes of the teachers. It's that empathy element that's very powerful. Now, what does that look like in terms of practice if we drill down to the details?
So you're asking the design thinker the meta practice of design thinking. So I'm very much applied design thinking to my course design, and I've written a lot about it. And I've developed a few models, and one of them I call the Nexus model, and it's a cyclical model of education where the students feed back into the iteration of the next module.
Perfect.
So it's a co-design exercise. And so I always really need to understand who my students are, and I design in very early in the semester an activity asking them who they are. They do it before they come to their first class. Introduce yourself and tell us why you're here and why you want to be studying this course.
So you're essentially getting them to develop the stakeholder personas.
Yeah, pretty much. And a lot of students say they find that quite an odd thing to be asked, why are you here? But it makes them think, why am I here? But for me, it allows me to understand that this particular group really has a preference to learn this, so I can emphasise, there's flexibility in my courses so that I can tailor it to what the group needs are.
No, I love that, because I actually do that with my first years at QUT in an architectural context. Just going around the table. I don't do it in a formal scenario. It's more just as an icebreaker, but to get that same validation and that information of why did you actually choose architecture? Was it because you love building design, or is it because of something said something, or is it because your mommy told you to do it? I don't know. Like millions of reasons.
Yeah. And I think that's it. It's very easy to make an assumption about the group of students you're teaching, but as you know, over time you'll have every cohort's different.
Yeah.
And this semester I've had a really, really insecure cohort.
Wow.
That's not a bad thing. It's
Yeah.
just that they're not as sure about their skill sets and they need a huge amount of reinforcing. So I've built a lot of peer review in, so they're getting additional feedback just to my feedback, and it's helping them constructively review their own work and that of others. And that reflective practice is important in design thinking, and when you've got a less confident group of students, it's actually a really great way to build confidence. But if I had a really confident group of students, I might not be doing that. I might be pushing them to do a voluntary team exercise together, or to design a new tool or hack a tool. So it will depend on the competency level and the confidence level of the cohort.
Yeah, definitely. And that's, I think, really cool, because this is actually something that I've written about as well, that design thinking has, as an educator, it can be taken as an approach and the subject content. And I think the really cool work happens when those two align. And I think that's where going from teaching towards that previous industry to Industry 4.0 and changing the mindset of teachers, I think that's where the biggest battle is. Have you had any experience with that?
Yeah, there's a couple of really interesting innovation projects happening here in New South Wales where they're running some innovation labs with the Department of Education, and they're doing it on a design thinking framework. And I've met some of the people that are participating, and it's very encouraging to hear how they are not only thinking and bringing design thinking into the curriculum, and they want to extend that through to using design thinking for entrepreneurship with the students. But they're now seeing that there's also value in them using design thinking in designing their classes. They have less flexibility than we have here at an institutional level, but what inspires me is that students will now soon be coming to us from these environments where teachers have used that. There's also a new school that's recently opened up at Linfield called Linfield College. It's a public school, and it has design thinking as part of their curriculum, a formal part of the curriculum. And it's really, this is their first year of student intake, and I'm keenly watching how that develops. But I think having the design thinking in that secondary school context allows for much more agile thinkers and innovative thinkers within those students, and also allows them to explore more freely concepts. And I like the idea that they're expanding their thinking methods rather than rote learning, that they're actually becoming self-learners through design thinking.
That's right, and they don't actually have to then learn a brand new topic. They've already got that foundational knowledge set up at a secondary level, and then you can just boost them from there.
Yeah, well, I think the idea is that these students, instead of asking why, will be asking why not, and that's a big leap, and it's a really important one to make to become a self-contained learner.
I love that, actually. And you mentioned the word innovation and innovate a number of times already. How does it, obviously, there's a direct link, right? So how does it align with innovation?
So design thinking isn't the magic pill for innovation. But if you can develop a design thinking culture, I think it's been documented quite clearly that you're much more likely to be innovative in your approach. And I think that, again, that's because you acknowledge that there is a system in which you're working, you understand the parts within the system which you can influence. If you have a good systemic understanding of your industry, then you can see where the opportunities lie, and then you can align your sort of product development or your innovation resources towards areas that you can identify that match with your capabilities as an organisation. So it becomes a really excellent strategic tool for identifying opportunities for innovation. And then, because it's such a broad tool set and can be applied in many different ways, it can help you innovate in services, it can help you gain insights for product, it can help you gain insights in matching the two. So I think we're talking about, there's design for strategy here, but also the big problem that I see for most companies that take on this is that they do the strategy piece, but then they don't do the design doing piece. So they tick that, we've done it, we've done the IDEO thing, we've identified an innovation, and then they just go, we've done it. What they really need to do is then go and execute that project. And there's also a lot of design in the execution. So my favourite model is the extended the double diamond from the British Council, and that's because it is very simple. It's cyclical, it's stackable, it's expandable, and understandable by just about everyone.
Yeah.
I think it's the strongest of all the design thinking models.
Excellent. That's good. And I think there's actually syllabuses across different states taking that model on board, exactly the double diamond. Do you think the double diamond is a little bit outdated or suitable for the secondary level?
It's not outdated because it's constantly updated. So it's been recently updated, and a couple of the team members who developed it originally were in Sydney a few weeks ago and had a meeting with them. We looked at the latest version of it. I think it's every bit as useful as ever has been, and as the discipline sort of extends its knowledge, it has this simplicity, but it can take on the complexity as our knowledge deepens. And I think it's a classic.
It is definitely a classic, and I think what you just said is a breath of fresh air for a lot of my listeners being teachers. Is they think that it can be an outdated model, and there are millions and millions of different design thinking models out there, with pretty graphs and pretty pictures.
Yeah.
But I think it's the approach that's actually more important, and understanding the foundation.
It's the divergent, convergent, and divergent thinking that is really important, and that's the only model that really tells you about that.
Yeah.
I've studied all the different models. I love Jeannie Leker's model. It's great. I see huge amounts of shortcomings in the IDEO because it's specifically designed for large American corporate land. It does not work well in other contexts. In fact, every time you hear about a big corporate design failure in Australia, you can generally link it to an IDEO context. And then it's really hard to get buy-in for a second bite at the cherry to get the proper cultural fit. So, when people are thinking about applying design thinking in any of their practice, doesn't matter what industry, you need to find what is culturally the right fit for you. So there's a bit of research to be done before you just launch in. And because I teach people in the third sector about how to develop design thinking, sort of cultures within their workplace and how they apply it, and a lot of the time they'll be contracting in contractors to deliver that. I sort of discuss with them, what do you seek in a consultant who's going to come in and run your design thinking activities. And I say to him, it's not the person with the biggest brand name.
Yep.
It's the person with the closest cultural fit to your value set, who understands what you're talking about and is not going to sell you a set method. They're going to develop a method with you that suits your organisation.
Yep.
And that's the secret to successful design thinking, developing the right culture and the right tool set for your needs.
Which goes back to that exact foundational value, empathy.
Yes. Yeah, so organisational empathy is a good thing.
There you go. And obviously identifying a market and going through that innovation process and being able to identify problems and solutions, like you mentioned before, is almost what entrepreneurs are doing. Some people have it naturally, some people don't.
Yeah.
How does the link between design thinking and entrepreneurship come into play?
I think so I'm going to take this from a social innovation perspective. So human-centered design toolkit is the best way for social entrepreneurs to really deeply identify with empathise with the target audiences they're working with. So it's a very good marriage. And I think in business, the design thinking is about deeply understanding user needs and wants and desires and how you align them to create the perfect product for them.
It's a practice that every Fortune 500 company does.
Yeah,
some hit and miss.
But they do, and they don't necessarily articulate it. So they might call it, waterfall, or they might call it they're doing agile or lean or whatever. And I just keep having people going, oh, we're doing lean design thinking. And I'm like, well, if you're doing lean design thinking, are you really actually offering anyone anything? Design thinking is fat, right? It's juicy and it's ugly and cumbersome. But that's doing good research. You're digging up the dirt. You've got to get in there and be willing to see. And I think what a lot of people find very confronting about the design thinking process is they have to acknowledge errors that they're making and fix those. And so some companies get very unhappy with the design thinking process because it brings a few home truths to the surface.
Yeah.
But the companies that can embrace that and change, and this is why the whole systems analysis is great. Systems part of design thinking is great. Is when you're looking at a whole system, there's always going to be issues. So you just sort of make a list.
Yeah.
Start working through that. As I always say to everyone, do a quick, environmental scan when you first come to an organisation as a designer, because the top 5 things that you identify aren't going to change as issues, but you will start to become desensitised to them and not notice them after about 3 months.
Yeah.
They're your priorities to change.
Yeah.
As a design thinker, it's very hard to continue to remain fresh in an organisation unless you continually evaluate and look for those opportunities. In a social context, we're dealing with what we call wicked problems and sticky solutions, which design thinking is really good at pulling apart. So a wicked problem is a problem that whatever solution you throw at it is going to create more problems. And so you want to find a balance between solving enough problems and creating as few additional ones as possible.
Yeah, I mean the actual design process in a more industrial conventional sense, or architecture or spatial design or whatnot, it still carries that same thing. The more and more problems you encounter, it means that you can design out those problems. It's actually the similar approach and mindset, and I think I've found there's a lot of misconception because the design thinking has the word design in it. People think it's only for designers. How do you overcome that?
So this is what I say to you. Would you go to a doctor or a medical thinker?
Well, it depends on the problem, right? Did you mean from a treatability point of view?
If you had an illness and you couldn't work out what it was making you feel terrible, you could feel better, would you go to a doctor or a medical thinker?
Doctor.
Yeah, so you go to the designer who's the design thinker.
Yeah.
Designers are educated differently to everyone else in an in an educational context. We are designed to be risk happy, but take calculated risk. And I think this is why industry loves design thinking, because it's kind of like a formula that you can apply to manage your risk in an innovation context. But if it's not done right, you're going to fail. So you want someone who understands it. So you want someone who has design training. You don't want the consultant who's gone and done a course for a week to now come and practice their skills on you.
That's right.
And it's really hard to often, if you're not an expert, to dig through that charade. So, you want people, if you want a good set of design thinkers in, have a look at their CVs, see if they've got a design background and complex problem solving, and have won a few projects, executed a few good projects, because they're the ones that will give you a good outcome. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
And how do we facilitate that at a secondary level? Have you had much experience with that? Just because 21st century skills is becoming a massive element.
I think that I often think, where does it fit? And it's being put into the sort of the manual arts and design.
Because of that same problem that I mentioned before. It's got that design element, so it fits there. That's why I feel like it's not exactly.
But so I've worked with some private schools in Sydney who've asked me to come in, and they might be doing a unit in economics on developing startups, and they'll bring me in to talk about design thinking in startups. So I think there's many other aspects. This design thinking in science is really interesting. So the neuroscience aspects of it, the biomimicry aspects of it can be tackled. So you could bring the design thinking in as an overlay for all the education that ties all your education together. So I think one of the things we don't do in secondary school is say, okay, we silo all the courses, and all the courses are studied separately. And then we ask them to integrate when they come here to university. Well, maybe we could start some of that integrated practice at secondary level for students.
This is actually very much aligning with what I teach when we go on teacher training. It's exactly the approach that I'm teaching them. And I think that's the biggest barrier right now because the classrooms and the faculties are segmented. If we're learning English, we're only learning English. If we're learning design, we're learning design. But in factual terms, it would actually fall across almost every single element as a foundational approach. And I love that this is why it's one of my favorite topics. But do you have much advice on how educators today at a secondary level, or tertiary actually, can empower the next generation of future leaders to take that on?
You know what I'd love to see? I'd love to see like entire school education, all the educators at the school come together and just say, what is the student experience? What should it be? And then how can we draw linkages between our subject matters. So you might be doing...
I'm sorry, if I may pause you there. That is actually so powerful what you just said. If you're listening, teachers listening, student experience, that's your end client. Start there.
Yeah.
I love that. Sorry.
No. You're excited like a designer.
I am, yeah.
No, I think I think there's so much potential in just saying, what do we want our student experience to be?
That's right.
And why don't you ask the students to be involved in that process? And I very much love the concept of peer-led learning. So when I was at high school, and this is a long time ago, one of the most wonderful things that happened to me was in year 8, someone gave me an Edward de Bono lateral thinking program manual. And they said, we want to run this at school. Do you think you could do it? I don't know why they gave it to me. But that sent me on my design thinking path. So lateral thinking was the design thinking of the day in the business parlance. And I got a whole lot of kids together from year 7 and 8 and 9. And we worked our way through this manual. And then we thought, hold on, this lateral thinking is really good for debating. And this lateral thinking is really good for commerce. And so we thought about all the other places we could embed it. And I think design thinking is very much the same. So why don't you co-design with your students what part of their educational experience? It's such an amazing and powerful way to gain student engagement. Can the greater community with the school be involved in this? So how do they want to link with the community? And then that brings industry and community engagement to the school, and the school starts to become this centre for different thinking or innovative stuff or exciting things going on. And it doesn't matter whether you're a well-resourced school or not. Design thinking really doesn't cost much to do.
That's what I mean. I
do it.
Completely agree with that. And I think recently we sent a group of, I think it was 24 or 25 year 10 students, and we asked them to design think how to improve their classroom and their school learning environment. And the ideas they came up with, and I swear to God, some of them are actual really good startup ideas that they can go and take, but others were actually identifying the big issues, because there's no accountability for them to point out errors in the school. They love doing that. And coming up with ways of how they could actually improve that.
Yeah, and that's the design doing part. So we have to shift from just doing the design thinking to including the design doing, or it's not worth our time.
See, that particular school actually had a really good leadership team that was open to those errors and being able to be vulnerable with the student. And what their leadership team did was take away every single post-it note and read that. Whether they're implementing or not, I want to check back in 12 months' time. But it was actually quite incredible to see that relationship, and the students felt comfortable doing it. Because the teachers were open to it. So that's, I think, very powerful.
And I think I just want to reiterate that I don't condone post-it notes. They're not sustainable financially or environmentally. There are many other tools that you can use.
You can. What are your preferred medium?
I just love a good piece of butcher's paper. And I do Lego Serious Play, which is a really good way to understand how systems work when you've got silos, and also to break down hierarchies, which is good in a school context. I love sort of doing dramatage. So in design jams, you can get people to act out a service, and then you can work out how to improve it by having people jump in and change parts of that service story. Storyboarding, storytelling, narrative,
very powerful.
Drawing, So there's lots of things you can do besides. If you don't have post notes, don't panic. You can be a design thinker.
That's right. How do you learn about design thinking if they don't know anything about it? Where's the best place to go and learn?
My favourite current resource that's free and downloadable is the design, DIY handbook, the Design Impact and You handbook, which is about doing design for good. And I think, again, at a high school level, kids love to do positive, empowering projects. So if you're looking at it from a development perspective, they could be working with some local environmental project or something with the council or those sorts of things, and that's a really good framework. So it's got all the tools nicely set out. It's very easy to follow, and like step-by-step guides on how to do it.
Brilliant. There you go. And look, I think we've learned a lot about it. I think I've picked up some knowledge gaps in my own learning about design thinking today. Thank you so much, Selena. Do you have any last words or advice for... I've got... My listeners are usually tertiary and secondary students as well as educators and some design professionals. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. But in terms of being a design thinking expert, do you have any last words?
Yes, we do all of our learning by making mistakes, reflecting on them and doing better next time. So don't just read the theory, get out there and do it. If you don't do it right the first time, it doesn't matter. Just keep going until you get it feeling like it should be feeling.
I love that. Perfectly said and powerfully delivered. Thank you so much, Selena.
Thank you.